In this video, we're going to take a look at implementing business logic. Now, even though the Savoy platform is entirely Java-based, you don't have to write any Java during your development or deployment. Instead, all business logic is written using JavaScript, although you can write inline Java if you want to. JavaScript was chosen because it's an internet standard, it's easy to learn, and it's one of the most widely used scripting languages on the planet. Using a combination of JavaScript and Savoy's built-in APIs, you can quickly and easily create almost any type of business logic. Your business logic can be implemented in 4 different scopes. First off, there's a global scope which applies to the entire solution. There's a form-based scope in which the variables and methods apply to a specific form. That's the one that we're going to be dealing with in this video. There's a found set scope where entity methods and table events are executed. And finally, there's a calculation and aggregation scope that are tied to individual records. Enough talk. Now let's see how we can implement some real-life business logic. In this example, I want to get rid of the default navigator and create custom navigation buttons. So to start off, I'm going to drag a button right onto the form, and I can double-click to change the name, or down here in the Properties palette, I can click the text property and change the button. So I'm going to use a greater than symbol for the next, and then adjust the button size a little. All right, now we have our object, and what we're going to do is we're going to attach a method to this object. We're going to go over to the onAction event, which is the click in this case, double click, and now Savoy will allow me to either select a method or create a new one. And as you can see, it will let us create a form scope, an entity scope, or a global scoped method. In this case, we're just going to create a form-based method. I'm going to call this method recordNext. And I'm going to make this a public method, which means that other methods can call this method. And then I'm going to click OK. Now, to actually view my method, there are a couple of different ways you can do it. The first way is you can click the icon next to the name of the method, or you can actually go to the Solution Explorer, click on your form, and then you can see our method appears here. You can either double-click it or right-click it and say Open in Script Editor. So you can see that Savoy created a new blank JavaScript function for me. Also notice that Savoy passes in a JavaScript event object for each action that's generated in the user interface. Now this event object contains information about when it was triggered and the component that triggered it, etc. We're not going to be dealing with that in this video, but just be aware that it's there. Take a look at everything that's here below your solution. Everything below your solution are built-in Savoy APIs that you can use to implement your business logic. They include a basic JavaScript library, an applications node, a solutions model that allows you to create objects on the fly at runtime, a database manager that deals with everything having to do with the actual data, a utilities node, a navigational history item, a security API, I18N or internationalization node, a JS unit for testing, and a whole set of plugins. This plugin node contains plugins that were created by Savoy or by third parties. You can get new plugins and install them into your applications plugins folder. And you can even write your own plugins. There's a plugin API. All right, let's get back to our own example here. We're going to come up to our method, and I'm going to take out this automatically generated comment here, and we're going to go ahead and take a look at the APIs that are available on our form. So if I expand the forms node, there's a controller object, and that's what we're going to use to go to the next record. Now, I happen to know that the function that we're looking for is called setSelectedIndex. So if I roll over, it will show me the syntax as well as an example. I can then just double-click this, and it will insert it into my method for me automatically so it has the right method. Now, I can also right-click this and say Move Sample. And this will put in sample code, commented sample code for me. And actually, this is what we're looking for. We want to use controller set the selected index to the next one. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to put this in here. I'm going to double click it. And then I'm going to use another controller function called get current index. Savoy's got some great productivity enhancers. So it has type ahead for all the API commands, as well as your own commands. So I'm going to go ahead and double click this index, and I'm going to type controller, and I'm going to hit the control space, and it's going to give me a suggested list. So I'm going to choose controller, and then it's going to say get selected index plus 1. And there you go, as simple as that. So we're going to save that. I'm going to save my customers form, And we'll go ahead and boot it up. Here's our next button, and as I click it, it goes to the next record. Let's come back into Savoy Developer here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this button and I'm going to copy and paste it, and I'm going to change the code that's attached to each one of the buttons. Okay, now that I have all of my buttons and scripts created, I'm going to give them a name so that I can programmatically reference them in other scripts. All right, I'm going to go ahead and save my form, and we'll switch back to the NG client. And you can see we have our buttons. I can go to the first record, I can go to the last record, and I can go to the previous record. All right, so far so good. Now what I want to do is I want to turn off the default navigator. So I'm going to click on my form, and over here in the navigator, rather than default, I'm going to change that to none. And the next thing I want to do is I want to have a label on here that shows what record we're on, because we don't really know since we took away the default navigator. To do that, I'm going to drag a label out. And again, I can either double click this, or I can double click it down here in the actual text property to give us a little bit bigger box, which I'm going to use. So I'm going to say record, and then I can use different text properties. So there's the actual data from the columns. I can use calculations, other form variables, scope variables, and there's some standard tags down here at the bottom. So I'm going to say selected index of, and then max record index. I'm going to actually go ahead and throw in the city as well, just for fun. So this will take the city from the current record. All right, I'm going to say OK here. Now, I have to do one more thing so that Savoy will recognize that there are tags in here and not just render that literal text. If I click over here to display tags and set it to true, let's save our form and go back to our NG client. And you'll see here that I'm on record 88 of 91, and the city pulls from the actual record that I'm on. I can go to the first record, and it shows Berlin. I can go to the last record, and it shows again the city based on the record that we're on. So far, so good. All right, let's add some additional business logic. When we're on the first record, I don't want the previous and first record buttons to be enabled, because that doesn't make any sense. Likewise, if we're on the last record, I don't want the go to last and the next button to be enabled. So let's go ahead and write some business logic to take that into consideration. We're going to come back over here to our form. Again, I'm going to click on the form, and I'm going to use an event on the form. As you can see, there are lots of different events on data change, focus lost, focus gained of any element, but the thing that we're interested in right now is on record selection. This fires every time you go to a different record. So we're going to go ahead and double click. I'm going to create a form method, and I'll just keep the default name called onRecordSelection. Now I can click OK and show, and this will open up the script editor and bring me right down to the code. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take a look at our named elements. Remember, I added a name to each of the buttons, and here they are, button first, button last. And as I click on each of those named objects, you'll see that there are a number of properties and a number of functions for each one of those objects that I can affect during runtime. We're going to be taking a look at the enabled property. But first, we want to set up a variable that will contain a Boolean, which is true or false. So here in my code editor, I'm going to type the word var for variable. OK to go next equals. And then we're going to use our controller object again. We're going to say greater than 1. So if it's greater than 1, it will return true. And then we're going to go ahead and reference our button first. I'm going to go to enabled and double click. I'm going to go ahead and use the autocomplete. So I'm going to say OK, and I'm going to hit Control Space, and notice I put the name of my variable in there for me automatically. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead here. I'm just going to copy this and paste it. And I'm going to change which object from button first to button previous. Now I'm going to do the same thing, but for the next and last buttons as well. I'm going to call this variable OK to go previous. All right, now we're going to go over here to our button next, enabled, equals. Now I'm going to start typing OK, and I'm going to choose Control Space, and I'm going to choose my new variable. It's called go to previous. And again, we're going to copy and paste that. And change this to button last. All right, let's go ahead and save this. We'll go over to the NG client. And here, if I go to the next record, all the buttons are clickable. If I go to the first, notice how the go to first and the previous buttons are disabled. I can still go to the next, and they're just fine until you get to the first record. Likewise, if I'm scrolling through and go to the last record, the go to next and go to last buttons are disabled as well. Well, that's about it for this really quick overview of how to implement business logic in Zervoy. For Zervoy University, I'm Bob Cusick.